Okay, we're gonna do Empire Builder. This is the first of the crayon rail schemes. We always called them crayon rails. There were games that were earlier than this that used crayons as choo-choo track. Damn Frost comes to mind, I think. But this was the first one that came to America, basically on it, in mass production. Mayfair put this out. And it has launched a whole series of games of its ilk, all of which use pretty much the same rules. While this is one of the games that I've perhaps played the most in the series as well, mainly this one, Euro Rails, and Iron Dragon, all of which come with the puzzle board. Puzzle boards are cool. They give you something enjoyable to do before you have to deal with the game itself. I've never been a big fan of the crayon rails system, but I played a hell of a lot of it. My first wife was very much into it. My second wife saw it as, kind of an enjoyable pastime. Most games that we played, she wasn't as amiable to, but this is a fairly light game with an interesting puzzle aspect to it, not just the board, but in terms of, hey, what can you actually reach and make your money with? And I'll explain how the system works in a little bit. I have avoided later versions. Came in a rolled up plastic thing, like a tube, and the map just kind of rolls out. It's a big laminated thing. The idea is, in any case, that you draw right on the map between the dots in order to represent your track. Each player has their own track, and you pay money to run on each other's on another player's track, but you don't have to pay for your own. I never really liked the big tubes. I wasn't a big fan of the game system as it stood, but given that, well, my first wife was very much into them, and honestly, a couple of my friends were also very, very much into it, which is kind of how I was introduced to it. When I first saw it, I was a little intrigued because it reminded me a little bit of Rail Creep, Railroad Tycoon. But just in the laying of the track, right? The actual game is going to be a standard pickup and delivery. You pick up materials as represented by cards that you need. There's a limited counter mix of chips. You have some cash money. You have cards for different types of trains, which I should probably put somewhere else. And you have special crayons, which are erasable, sort of. Certain colors are a little harder to erase than others, which is a reason why it may not be a great idea to play in the full 6 players. Also, the yellow is kind of hard to see. That's one of the ones that's hard to erase. So I'm trying to debate whether or not I want to play in 4, 5, or 6. Any less than that, this board is fairly open, and it's pretty easy to build most of the major routes that you're going to need. So that's kind of a no-go. It's not an easy game to solo. The reason being that you're going to be spending a fair amount of brain power figuring out, can I make this route or not? There are a number of different variants in it. We even made up our own that the people who really, really liked the game generally did not like. It was, we termed it harsh rails, and you had to pay for everything, and the idea was you would go bankrupt several times, but your track would stay on the board that you were bankrupted from, and it would enable other players and yourself, when you come back in as a new company, to make runs playing off someone else's track but paying the bank for it. It was a weird situation. But yeah, the people who... and here I've got an auction set of rules, public locking rules, just a bunch of different options they generally didn't play with. Okay, let's take a look at the rules. But I mean, the basis of it is on your turn, you draw some track, you pay the money for the track that you draw, and then you run your train. And your train has a fixed speed as to how many spaces it can travel, and it has a number of spaces on it that are the number of commodities that it can carry. It picks up commodities from specific locations that have them. So for example, Oklahoma City here will have, I guess that's grain or wheat and oil. Different games term things differently, so, you know, I think it's always wheat, but I'm not sure. And the deck of cards, I'll show you those in a moment. Let's put the first player out, whoever the first player is going to be. Let's call it green. They're going to get 3 cards at the beginning of the game. And there are variants in this where you could, you know, hey, you take 6 cards initially and discard 3 or whatever. There are some disasters in here, or events is more capable. If those come out at the beginning of the game, they get reshuffled, so you may have to shuffle the deck twice, especially in a lot of people. So what these cards represent is each card represents one set of opportunities. So I would get $11 million if I delivered cattle to Seattle. Now, Seattle's up here, and there's cattle not far away, so that's not going to be a big run. And you can see most of these aren't too big. Lead to Pittsburgh. Well, Pittsburgh is over here, and I don't know where the fuck the lead is anymore. There's some here in Denver. I think that's the closest. There is a compendium somewhere telling you where all the different loads are available. I may have to look that up. It's been a long time since I played. My second wife and I played this a couple of times while we were in Phoenix, and I don't know, it kind of fell off the radar. It's not something I enjoy, and unlike my first wife, she wasn't completely addicted to this as one of the games. Actually, my first wife was more into Iron Dragon, which is a fantasy-themed version of this, where you have a little bit more complexity in it. There's an underground section, and different races have different advantages. In this one, everybody plays exactly the same. So, let's look. You start the game with your 3 cards, I think with $40 million in this one. Should have done the setup, you know, before, because I remember these rules aren't terribly easy. Yeah, you get $40 million to start the game, and you get a freight train, which is a speed 9 train with 2 loads. Now, one of the things you can do in addition to buying track is you can buy, instead of buying track, I think, you can buy a train, and you buy an upgrade 1 level at a time. So from the freight train, you have a choice to go with a heavy freight that has 3 load but keeps the same speed, or a fast freight that goes speed 12. And I think the cost for that is $20 million in this game. And then the next upgrade is also $20 million, and that gives you the combination of the 2. When we played Harsh, you had a speed 6 with 1 load train. You had to pay, I think, on every turn as well. Even to run on your own track, you had to pay like $1 or something. I don't remember what it was. Okay, so let's look at what happens. So you get your 3 trains, you get your money, you get a pawn and a crayon, and you will always have 3 cards in your hand. When you deliver something, you'll get a new card. That could be a bad event, in which case that gets resolved, and then you keep drawing until you get a legitimate card. Okay, so on your turn, so I was wrong about the order. On your turn, first you move your train along track that's already on the board. And you'll be moving it at the speed it travels at. When you reach a location, you may pick up goods at that location. You may have to abandon some things to do so. It's often a good idea to carry extra freight with you because some of the disasters say you lose a load. You get to choose which load, so you carry some ballast. And you also pay any costs that you have to pay for running on other people's rails. And if you reach a destination, you get the payoff as listed on the card. Then you're allowed to spend $20 million on a turn to either build track or upgrade a train. Instead of taking your turn, you can discard your entire hand and draw 3 new cards. This is a good way to get events. Event cards drawn take effect immediately. If you lose your turn from an event card, you may not discard your hand during that turn. Now, at the beginning of the game, things go a little quicker. You're allowed to build some track to begin with, right? We're not seeing it there. Oh, here we go. Yeah, like I said, it's not necessarily in the best order. Okay. At the beginning of the game, players take 2 turns with no train movement at all in order to start building their rail empires using up to their 40 million. You can use up to 20 million in each of your 2 beginning turns. After looking at the 9 different options of demands that are listed on your cards, you find where the loads are located on the board. Knowing this, you plan the route for the railroad and begin to build track. You build by drawing 1 milepost to the next. For each section of track, you have to pay a cost based on the terrain that you're entering and possible crossing of rivers and whatnot. Okay. So you can begin building track from any major city, which is these big red blobs, or from any milepost on which you already have track. You cannot build more than 2 track sections from major city mileposts during 1 turn. So at the beginning of the game, you could start building some track out of Kansas City and some track out of Los Angeles with the intention of grabbing the good routes in both directions. Okay, there's not really a good route out of Kansas City. In general, you will never build into a major city because the cost is very high, but now and then you might want to do that because you've already built out of 2 major city locations. Highly unlikely, almost never have seen it happen. Okay, every player has the right to build at least 1 section of track from every major city. No track can be built from a major city, which would block any other player from having 1 section of track from that major city. And this is important because to win the game, you have to have a cash total and you have to connect up 5 of the 6 major cities in this particular game. Okay. For smaller cities, the mediums, which are these squares, and the small cities, which are the circles, only 3 players can build track into a medium and only 2 into a small. Now, in 2 players, maybe even 3, you may want to further limit this. And I don't remember if it was an official rule or not, but certainly when we played in 2, we made it so that only 1 person could go into the minor cities, but I think both could go into the medium-sized cities. No track can be built from a medium city, which would block a 3rd player from having 1 section of track into the medium city. Yeah, you can't build track coming out of a city in such a way that someone could not get in who would have a right to get in. Only 1 section of track can be built between any 2 mileposts. You got to be careful that you don't draw like a piece of track running down between mileposts. You have to actually hit the closest distance. They're on a hex kind of shape, so, you know. And there's always 6 adjacent dots, unless there's a water in the way or whatever. You can't build more track than you can actually pay for. Now the costs are based here. So if you're building into a clear milepost, it costs 1 million. If you're building into a mountain, it costs 2. That can add up real fast. The small and medium cities cost 3 to enter. There's no other way to get into them. Once you're in it, you can come out for cheaper costs. The major city, if you want to draw track from outside into the major city, it costs you 5, but you would almost always draw from here into whatever that terrain is. Rivers. When you cross any river, it's going to cost you 2 million extra bucks in addition to what you have. Now you got to be careful with rivers because they flood. In this game, the entire Mississippi river system, including the Ohio and Missouri, can flood. And that'll wipe out any bridges that are crossing it. And then also the Colorado and Columbia flood on another card. It's important to kind of know what the disaster cards are. There are derailments that are based on specific locations. You can know when you're safe and try to avoid moving to certain spaces or try to get across the river, at a certain point. This can be really, really important because sometimes this is a game where you've spent all your money and then, you're reaching close to the bridge that you have. The bridge gets washed out and now you're not allowed to turn around and you're just screwed. So you can lose the game due to a disaster if you misplan. What else do we have here? Ocean inlets. Now there are very few of these, but they cost 3 million additional. I think the same as the cost for crossing up here. These count as ocean inlets as well. And there's a specific place where it expresses which of those are allowed. In general, you're not going to be crossing ocean inlets, but there's one here, Okay, actually hauling your freight. So wherever your trains start, your train can start at any city on the map. You don't have to start in a major city. You can start at a location where you can pick up the goods that you need right off the beginning of the game. From then on, it's going to be, the train's going to move around and it's going to be wherever it ends up being at. Now, this is why it's hard solo, and especially the way I play, walking away from the game quite often. You've got like this plan of, oh, I'm going here, then I'm going here, then I'm going here, all set up. It takes a fair amount of mental energy to realize what your plot is, and you could write this down, of course. And then you walk away, or you move to the next player or whatever in a solo game, and it's really hard to figure out, what you're doing. One thing that I'm going to try to do is notate which direction my train's running. A friend of mine had little choo-choos instead of these pawns. Those are better because you can kind of, you can kind of place them so that the front is showing towards the direction you're heading in. And that helps just as a little reminder of what the hell is going on, even if you're not playing solo. Sometimes, you take a break or stop thinking for a few minutes and you look back and you're like, which way am I going? What am I doing? Unlike in Rail Baron, where you write down your destination each time and whatever, you have little chips to indicate it. Here, you don't really have anything to memorialize that except for these cards. The problem with those little trains is that they were a little too big. This thing fits on a dot just perfectly. The little trains were just a little too big. I could pull some out of UP or something like that. I gotta swap batteries. On the trains, just by moving along your track, I don't have any track drawn on the board, but, you know, if there was track, say, running from Kansas City to Oklahoma City, and I was in Oklahoma City, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever, you know, following the track. As long as it's your own track, you don't have to pay anything. If you're in a city that has a commodity, you can pick up that commodity, assuming that there are any chips left for it. That was another thing we did in 2 players, was we reduced all the chip sizes by 1. And that's up to the size of your train. You can drop off a load at any time, and it just goes back in here again. There's options to fuck around with that. It doesn't cost you anything to pick up or deliver. When you deliver a load to a city, when you reach a city that has a demand card that you wish to cash in, you discard that demand card, you take the cash for it, and the chip goes back into the available loads. You draw a new card. You think for a little while because that new card has just changed your world, perhaps, and then you continue your turn. After finishing your movement, you're allowed to spend 20 million to buy additional track or to pick up a new train. Event cards. Yeah, some of the event cards are a certain number of mileposts away from certain locations. You count from the city center and not from an outer milepost. Sometimes trains move at half rate. This is rounded up. Yeah, they have the 2-player. But it may not be what I think. When track is flooded out, all track of all players bridging the river is immediately erased. Track across the river may be rebuilt during the player's regular turn and only after the flood event card has been discarded. Okay, so when an event card that has a lasting effect comes up, like a flood, it's put in front of that player, and at the end of their next turn, it goes away. So a river that floods, you won't be able to rebuild that track at the end of your turn, and nobody will be able to rebuild that track until the end of your next turn. So as the person who draws the bad event, you are actually subject to a greater potential loss than anyone else. Derailments. When this happens, the only trains that are affected are those within the area at the time the card is drawn. It doesn't have a long-lasting effect. Lost loads. When you lose a load, you choose which load is lost. This is why you carry ballast sometimes. You also might want to carry random stuff because you might end up drawing a delivery card in your general area for something that you're just carrying at random. You know, Canadian rail strike. This affects all mileposts touching the Canadian border. I think that's meant to represent things like this or this. It's everything in Canada. You win the game by connecting 5 of the major cities and having $250 million in cash. Only cash is counted. Your money for your railroad, your goods on board, none of that counts. Everything is face up to sea, except your money need not be shown until the rail tax event happens. After which, the amount of players' money is also public information. I think also if you declare victory. No, I'm thinking rail baron. Okay. Now, this is not the first edition of the game. Hence, they have the variations and say since it first appeared. Okay. One is to start you with more money and more builds. Discard event cards dealt during the initial deal. Don't shuffle them into the deck. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so they... freights and heavy freights move faster, and the fast freight moves faster yet. The rail tax doesn't have an effect. You don't have to connect the major cities. There's a sudden death. I've never played those rules. Honeymoon rules, reduce the load ships, yeah. Only 2 players can build it, yeah. And any load can be dropped off at any city. If the load is available in that city, it is returned to the tray. If not, it remains on that city. This we did not play with, which was loads remain on the board. I found that just too obnoxious, and we never actually did it. And so we played kind of a limited version of the honeymoon. Mercy, sometimes you can get screwed in the game. So they say, hey, you can borrow money in order to pay an emergency build, or because a river gets wiped out or something, or to run on other people's track, and then you owe double that amount borrowed from delivery profits until you pay it off, and you can't build anything until then. Okay. I did not get to the payment for use, which has to be here somewhere. Yeah, you pay nothing to run on your own track. It costs you 4 million per turn to run on someone else's track. And that's for each person whose track you run on. But you could run on different segments of their track. Like you pay $4 million and you could run a little bit of their track, and then a little bit of your own, and then a little bit of theirs, or something like that, all on one turn. Each turn that you run their track, though, you have to pay $4 million. That adds up real fast. You'll find that you do not want to run on other people's track. Your payoffs just don't make up for it. But sometimes it's the only way to get rid of a card efficiently. Oh, what else do we have here? Backtracking. One of the options in the Mercy is to allow people to backtrack. This is a big deal if you get stuck at a river or something. There's also a complete restart where you just erase your stuff and start with a new company. This is what we did for the harsh rolls. Options to play for a time limit, equal turns, options to let everybody have as many turns, and then when somebody declares their victory at 250, if someone exceeded them, then they win, and the victory limit on a tie, on an actual tie, gets boosted up with all players still eligible to win. Cross grading. Yeah, this allowed you to spend just $5 million to switch from a fast freight to a heavy freight, or vice versa. And then they have like this challenge, start with 30 million in a slow freight which travels 6 mile posts and carries 2 loads. Yeah, we took that a step worse, you know. And just a bunch of these, hey, let's try to make things uglier. Oh, junction cost. I didn't talk about that because there's this branching. When you run into someone else's track, that has a cost. I'm forgetting what happens here. I'm not seeing it. Let's see where this is. Players may build track from mileposts connected to any player's track. No junction charge is paid. Yeah, I don't think there is a junction charge normally. So I think that just shows up here. But that's like a, hey, you can start building track out of somebody else's. This is a big deal. If somebody builds a main line that you want to use, but you need to get to a small city off their track or whatever, and they don't connect it, you know, it could get you into the basic area of their track, but then you don't have to pay coming from a large city in order to connect up to the little location you need to go. I'm not a big fan of any of that. Selling and trading track, they allow you to do that as an option. Different loads that could be added to the game. The circus, which is one of them that they put forward, I didn't like it. It's sort of this wandering chip that goes around and has an impact if you move it around. They got some clarifications on the map. So this is the Great Lakes. These cost, oh, I'm sorry, these cost like rivers do instead of like inlets. I thought they were inlets. This is part of the Ohio here. So here they kind of define what an inlet is and what is not. And so like, it's not an inlet where there's an actual inlet, but where there's this huge gulf, that's an inlet. Yeah, okay. This is an ocean inlet there. And then we've got the compendiums and whatnot. And we'll give this a shot and see how I can do it on video. I may not make it through because, like I said, it's a painful game to solo. But whatever.